In the United States, the question of when you can legally shoot someone in self-defense is one of the most misunderstood legal topics. Many people believe that if someone threatens you, then you can immediately use a gun. The reality is far more complex. Self-defense law in America is based on a combination of state statutes, court decisions, and constitutional principles. Each state has its own detailed rules, but there are common legal foundations that apply across the country. Understanding these principles is critical because using a firearm unlawfully can lead to life in prison. This explanation is for educational purposes only and not legal advice. At the core of American self-defense law is the principle of reasonable fear. Deadly force, including shooting a firearm, is only justified when a person reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or serious bodily harm. The key words here are reasonable, necessary, and imminent. Reasonable means that an average person in the same situation would also believe there is a real threat. Necessary means there is no safer alternative available at that moment. Imminent means the threat is happening right now, not in the past and not at some uncertain time in the future. Self-defense law does not give people unlimited freedom to use force. The force used must be proportional to the threat faced. This is called proportionality. If someone pushes you during an argument, you generally cannot legally shoot them because the level of force would be excessive compared to the threat. However, if someone points a loaded gun at you and threatens to shoot, the law may consider deadly force justified. The situation is always evaluated based on the total circumstances. Courts look at what a reasonable person would have believed in that moment.
Option.
Another
You are legally
expected
to
is the
take it
duty
instead
to
of
retreat
using
lethal force. In some states,
However,
before
many
using
states have
deadly force,
modified
you
or
must
removed
attempt
this
to
duty
retreat
through
if
what
you
are
can
commonly
safely
known
do
as
so.
stand your ground laws.
This means if you have
In
a
states
like Florida, a person who is lawfully present in a location has no duty to retreat before using deadly force if they reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent death or serious injury. Stand your ground does not mean you can shoot anyone you feel threatened by. The threat must still be immediate and serious. Closely related is the Castle Doctrine. This principle says that your home is your castle and you have stronger rights to defend yourself there. Under Castle Doctrine laws, if someone unlawfully and forcibly enters your home, you may be legally justified in using deadly force without first retreating. The reasoning is that people should feel secure in their own homes. Some states extend Castle Doctrine protections to vehicles and workplaces. However, even under Castle Doctrine, the use of force must still be reasonable. If a person accidentally enters your property without violent intent, the law may not justify deadly force. One of the most debated cases involving self-defense was the case of George Zimmerman. This case brought national attention to stand your ground laws and how they are applied. The jury ultimately found Zimmerman not guilty based on self-defense claims, but the case sparked intense public debate about race, firearms, and legal standards. The lesson from this case is that self-defense claims are evaluated based on specific evidence, witness testimony, and the jury's interpretation of reasonable fear. Imminence is one of the most critical factors in determining legality. The threat must be immediate. If someone threatens to harm you next week, you cannot legally shoot them today. If an attacker is running away and no longer poses a legal justification to use deadly force, also ends. Another factor the law focuses on whether the person was unavoidable at that exact initial aggressor. If you start a fight, you generally cannot claim self-defense unless you clearly withdraw from the conflict and communicate that withdrawal. For example, if you provoke someone into a fight and then escalate to deadly force, the law may not protect you. Self-defense is meant to shield victims, not aggressors. Firearm ownership in the United States is protected under the Second Amendment of the Constitution, but that right is not unlimited. Laws regulate where firearms can be carried, who can own them, and how they can be used. Even in states with strong gun rights, discharging a firearm unlawfully can result in severe penalties. Prosecutors analyze forensic evidence, surveillance video, 911 recordings, and witness statements to determine whether the shooting was justified. When police investigate a self-defense shooting, they typically examine whether there was a weapon involved, how close the attacker was, whether verbal warnings were given, and whether alternative actions were possible. They may also look at the shooter's past statements, social media activity, and any evidence of intent. A claim of fear alone is not enough. The fear must be objectively reasonable. Some states also provide civil immunity for justified self-defense shootings. This means that if a court determines the shooting was legally justified, the person who used force may be protected from being sued by the attacker or their family. However, this immunity varies by state and often requires a separate legal hearing. There are also situations involving defense of others. In most states, you are allowed to use deadly force to protect another person if you reasonably believe that the person is facing imminent death or serious bodily harm. However, if your belief was unreasonable, the same standards of necessity and another area of law involves defense of property. If your belief is reasonable, in general, deadly force cannot be used solely to protect property. For example, if someone steals your car and drives away, you cannot legally shoot them just to stop the theft. Deadly force is reserved for threats against human life, not property. Some Castle Doctrine laws create a legal presumption of fear when someone forcibly enters your home, but outside those circumstances, property alone does not justify lethal force. Juries play a central role in determining whether a shooting was justified. They consider evidence presented by both prosecution and defense. The defense may argue that the shooter acted out of genuine and reasonable fear. The prosecution may argue that the fear was exaggerated or that safer alternatives existed. The burden of proof standards vary by state, but generally, once self-defense is raised, prosecutors must disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt. It is also important to understand that laws differ significantly across states. Some states maintain a strict duty to retreat, while others broadly apply stand your ground principles. Urban areas may have different enforcement patterns compared to rural communities. Therefore, what might be legally justified in one state could result in prosecution in another. Anyone seeking specific advice must consult a qualified attorney licensed in their state. In conclusion, shooting someone in the United States is only legal under very limited circumstances. The person must reasonably believe they are facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. The force used must be necessary and proportional. In some states, there is no duty to retreat, while in others, retreat is required if safely possible. Understanding these principles is essential because a split-second decision can have lifelong consequences. However, misuse of force can lead to serious criminal charges, including murder. But real-world cases always depend on specific facts, evidence, and state law.